taking the same verses we looked at earlier. Let's read them again. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. I want to take our thought from the beginning of verse 1. Wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. The subject is encouraged by witnesses and being a witness of faith. First thing we want to do is consider the context. We mentioned this briefly in the first message. In context, there's different aspects of context. There is an immediate context. There is an extended context, if you will. So here we have to consider the context of the entire letter. Hebrews, of course, is written to Jews. These had been gloriously saved, but many of them were, or all of them, were living their lives surrounded by the influence of unbelievers, by the influence of ritualistic religion. They found themselves living in the midst of incessant threats and persecution from their unsaved countrymen, from their unsaved relatives. This, of course, brought some turmoil, difficulty into their lives. These children of God, these Hebrews, they had witnessed and they were continuing to witness. Many who professed to believe, they saw them depart from their profession of faith and return to the old ways of Judaism. And many of these saved Hebrews were struggling. They were struggling between the forms and the ceremonies of their old life in Judaism and the life that they're now called to live. And due to these circumstances, there, of course, were many dangers. And again, that's indicated throughout the book, throughout the letter, by the word lest. It's used 11 times, lest ye, throughout the letter. In the use of that word, if you follow it through in Hebrews, every time it's used, they were being warned against several things. They were being warned against drifting from the things they had heard. They were being warned against disbelieving the voice of God and coming short of the promises of God and just simply leaving the basic principles of their profession of faith, against thinking lightly of truth, against drawing back from God, against departing from the ways of God. And all of us deal with all of those things. And the intent of the writer is to admonish these saved individuals to persevere and to motivate them to a stronger and deeper faith, which of course would stimulate and embolden them in the matters of God. And this is seen in another phrase found throughout the book, and it's used 13 times. Let us, and then followed by a particular duty that they were to perform. So he's urging them to a certain way of living. And then 11 times there's the words heaven or heavenly, which of course states the nature of the life that they were to live. It was a spiritual life. And we need to always realize that the life that we're called to live is of a heavenly nature. It's of a spiritual nature. So the entire letter is an encouragement to persevere in the life that they were now to live as children of God, to press on for God, not to be sucked in and consumed by the surrounding ungodly influence of mere religion, in this case Judaism, and to just keep advancing toward Christ. So you have the context of the letter. Then there's the immediate context. And that's indicated by the very first word of verse 1, wherefore, which simply means for which reason, or in view of. Wherefore. Again, the thought is the reason has already been stated for what's about to be stated. In this case, as we said earlier, wherefore takes us back to chapter 10. Verses 35 through verse 40 of chapter 11. And in verse 35 of Hebrews chapter 10, there is the exhortation, cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. What he's saying is, do not quit. Do not quit. I know your circumstances are not desirable. Do not quit. Do not cast away. And that is followed by a declaration of personal need. In verse 36, he says, ye have need of patience. Do not quit. You have need of patience. You have need of endurance, the ability to bear without breaking. You have need of this. You have need to be able to bear without breaking. This is followed by a statement of encouragement. Verse 37 of Hebrews chapter 10. You have that word of encouragement. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come and will not tarry. He directs their attention to the Lord. And then in verse 38, there is a declaration of duty. Now, a word used to draw attention to a particular statement. The statement is the just. Those who have been justified, those who have been saved, they shall live, they shall conduct their lives by or through the means of faith. And then notice, there's a contrast. But if any man, regardless of whom, draw back or quits, my soul shall have no pleasure in him. And then in verse 39, but, again, drawing a contrast to those who draw back, we, the saved by grace, the justified, are not of them. We're not of them. And then it's followed by a clarification. We're not of them who draw back into perdition, into ruin and destruction, but, or rather, of them that believe, or them that believe, have faith to the saving of the soul. So from this, in light of the book context, we see that faith is a key element in resisting the pull of the world. It is a key element in resisting the mere religious forms and ceremonies. And it is a key element in advancing and continuing spiritually. The just shall live by faith. And then the writer continues in chapter 11, establishing this thought. And then he comes into chapter 12, and he says, wherefore? To encourage us to this life. What he's saying is, if these Hebrews were to overcome and rise above their surroundings and continue on in the service of the Lord, they must possess and live by faith. And what is recorded in chapter 11 is by way of encouragement to them. Wherefore, seeing. In this case, conveying the idea of since, or the fact being, or because of that. So it is for which reason, since we are also compassed, surrounded with so great, so vast, so large a cloud of witnesses. So let's look at these witnesses. When the Hebrews heard that word cloud, wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud. Where do you think their minds went? I believe their minds probably went to the pillar of cloud in the wilderness. So great a cloud. That pillar of cloud was given them for guidance and direction. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. And this immediately follows what is recorded in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is a lengthy proof of the power of faith. The power of faith to enable possessors to do whatever God commands, however difficult it may be. To endure whatever God appoints, however severe. To obtain what He promises, however seemingly unattainable. Faith gives the ability to do these things. So now the writer applies the various illustrations given in Hebrews chapter 11, and he makes use of them as a motive in perseverance in the Christian life. These witnesses, to me, without a doubt, are the ones mentioned in chapter 11. Mentioned by name in chapter 11 are Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and he mentions the prophets. And then reference is made in verses 33 through 38 to many others. Their names are not mentioned, just many others. And then we read in verse 39, and these all, and these all. These are the witnesses referred to here in Hebrews 12, verse 1. So the question is, with regard to these witnesses, in what way do they bear witness? In what way do they bear witness? Without a doubt, these witnesses are meant to serve as an encouragement to the runners in the race. They are meant to serve as an encouragement to you and I to continue on. And this is seen in the words again, let us. Again, notice what it says. Seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us. So he's encouraging us to do something. Let us. So in what way do these witnesses serve as an encouragement? Most, and I mean most, believe, talking about God's people, those who have some familiarity with the Word of God, most believe, teach, and preach that these witnesses bear witness in the sense that they are spectators at a race. Heard it preached many times. And here's the picture that is presented. These individuals mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 are looking at us as if they are in a stadium, the spectators. The idea is that the saints of yesteryear are looking down from heaven, observing you and I, urging us to continue on in the race. I don't believe that. I do not believe that. And those who do view the witnesses in that sense, they view them strictly in the sense of seeing. If you see something, you're a witness. You're a witness. And they view them strictly in that sense. They are seen. But I don't believe that that's what we have here. Because I don't believe that the saints of heaven are looking down upon us. I believe that would take away from the glory of heaven. I believe that these witnesses are to be viewed not in the sense of observing, but in the sense of speaking and testifying. Again, a witness, you see something, you're a witness. But also, if you speak or testify of something, you're also a witness. You're bearing witness. And I believe this is the sense in which we need to view these witnesses. They are speaking. They are testifying of something. So I view them as testimonials of the life of faith. They are testimonials to the life of faith, and in that regard, they are witnesses. Again, wherefore, seeing we also are compassed with so great a cloud of witnesses. I believe what we have here is Romans 15:4. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience or endurance and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. So, the witnesses of our text, without a doubt, are those mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. And I believe that they declare to you and I by way of encouragement. They're not observing us, but they declare to you and I. They are a testimony to you and I of the importance, of the impact, and the effectiveness of faith. Now, if you consider the individuals mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, there are men and women who lived and excelled for God. And they did so in very sinful and difficult times. Not because of their talent, not because of their intellect or personality, but by faith and through faith. And as you read the chapter, the words by faith occur 15 times. By faith, by faith, by faith. Noah, Abraham, etc. 15 times. Then by it. Verse 2 of chapter 11, we have by it, referring to faith. So that's 16 times. And then you have the words through faith. And you have that 5 times. So by faith 15 times, by it 1 time, through faith 5 times, that's 21 times. 21 times. By and through. Or by means of faith. By means of faith. That's what by and through means. By means of. So those 2 words, by and through, illustrate that the ones mentioned in Hebrews 11, their source of activity was faith. Was faith. In other words, saving faith is alive. Saving faith works. Saving faith is productive. These witnesses declare such by their lives. They declare the power of faith. Faith is a power. Faith is a force. It is a power and force that can regulate our lives by faith, through faith. And these witnesses declare the power, the force of faith. So these witnesses, they're real people. They're not imaginary. They're real people. By real people, I mean that they are flesh and blood like ourselves. And they lived in the real world. I've had God's people say, well, people who have faith, they don't live in the real world. Oh, yes, they do. Yes, they do. That's where you exercise faith, is in the real world. If you're in heaven, you don't need to exercise it. So it's real people in the real world who have real problems, who have real battles, who have real burdens and real issues. And they lived and they died in faith. They were men and women who endured difficulties. Men and women who endured afflictions and trials and oppositions and obstacles. And they obtained what God had promised them in many cases. And they did so by faith. Through faith. It doesn't say they did so by truth. They did so by faith. What we have here in Hebrews 11 is a witness from the past. That it is possible to run the race that is set before us. Because each one of these in Hebrews 11, that's exactly what they did. They ran the race that was set before them. And they testify to us that it is possible. Someone says, well, it can't be done. Oh, these in Hebrews 11 say it can be done. It can be. They are witnesses. So those mentioned in Hebrews 11 bear witness that God is reliable. They bear witness of the fact you can depend on God. They are proof positive of God's enabling power. They are proof positive of God's care, His sustaining, and His blessing. These are the witnesses of Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. These witnesses have declared by their lives that we too can be impacted by faith. That we too can persevere. That we do not have to faint in our minds. We do not have to draw back. We do not have to pull away from God. These witnesses say it's possible to live for Him. Now you can consider these witnesses. And they lived in the awareness of God. They lived their lives dedicated, committed, and surrendered to God. And their lives declare that I can do the same. They did it, I can do it. They did it by faith, and that's how I can do it. That's how you can do it. They testify of that. They're witnesses. It was faith that caused these witnesses to pursue and to serve God. It was by faith that these witnesses lived lives of nonconformity and lived lives of transformation. And they are declaring to you and I, you can too. But it's by faith. It is by faith. It was by faith that these witnesses obeyed and followed God and enjoyed God and were filled with the peace of God and were filled with assurance and zeal. And these witnesses declare that our lives can be the same. These witnesses live lives above this world. They live lives above the mere shadow of religion. And that's what these Hebrews were struggling with. Many of them wanted to go back to the ritualistic ways of Judaism. And these witnesses declare you can live above that. You can live above mere religion. You can live life with a relationship, in a relationship with the Lord. These witnesses were not mastered, they were not controlled, they were not governed by their circumstances. They were governed, they were mastered and controlled by faith. That was the force in their lives. And these witnesses declare this can be you. These witnesses declare to you and I that we don't have to be spiritually drained and defeated in a world that is pulling in the opposite direction. Because they weren't. These witnesses declare to you and I that we can be spiritually advancing in spite of a world that pulls in the opposite direction. These witnesses, by faith, saw God. These witnesses, by faith, knew God. These witnesses, by faith, believed God. They anticipated God. That's something we lack today. Anticipate God. Anticipate God. These witnesses assented to God. They came to God. They laid hold of God. They embraced God. They leaned upon God. They relied upon God. They rested upon God. And they declare to you and I, we can do the same. How? Same way they did. By faith. And they did so in a world opposed to the spiritual. Oh, it's so difficult today. It was pretty difficult in Noah's day too. It was pretty difficult in Abraham. It's always difficult. ever since the fall. It's been difficult. And ever since the fall, the world has been opposed to the spiritual. And ever since the fall, this is a dark world. It's a world of trouble. It's a world of testing. It's a world of struggles. It's a world where you will experience great need and evil and wickedness. It's a world of hatred against God and the things of God. And ever since the fall, this world is a place where God is not honored, and God is not admired, and God is not sought. It's been that way. Now it progressively gets worse, because that's God's plan. But it's always been difficult. And yet these witnesses possess faith. What that means is that in spite of the times in which they lived, they could see and understand what others could not. How? By faith. Through faith. They could see and understand that spiritual matters were superior to temporal matters and were more advantageous than temporal matters. And as a result, they sought and they pursued what others did not seek and pursue. They sought and pursued God. These witnesses desired and sought the heavenly over the earthly. And they proclaim to you and I that we can do the same. They were persuaded that the heavenly was superior to the earthly. And their lives are a declaration of encouragement to you and I. These witnesses declare with their lives the impact, the power, the workings, the achievements of faith. These witnesses declare that God's people can do marvelous things, extraordinary things. They can achieve extraordinary things, not because of intelligence, not because of ability, but because of faith. They serve as an encouragement to you and I. These witnesses declare with their lives how faith acts, that faith has life, that faith is active, it's energetic, it's vigorous, that it is God-energized, that it is life-changing. If faith doesn't change your life, you don't really have much. If it doesn't impact your life, you don't have anything. So as you read through Hebrews 11, we see faith as the source, by faith, through faith. And you see it's the source of many things. It's the source of a good testimony. Verse 2, for by it, faith, the elders obtained a good report, a good testimony. These witnesses declare that you can be a good testimony by faith. It also is confidence in the truth. Verse 3, through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God, and so the things which are seen were not made with things which do appear. I'm not opposed to reading books on creation, going to places that promote creation. I'm not opposed to those things, but I don't need those things. I don't need those things to convince me, because I have faith. Faith. Faith leads to sacrificial giving and worship. We see that in verse 4. By faith Abel offered unto God. We see that faith leads to a life lived above the world. Verse 5, by faith Enoch was translated. He was risen above. And on you can go. Verse 6, you see that it's by faith that we please God. Then we come to God. Verse 7, it's faith gives us reverence and moves us for God. Verses 8 through 10, it causes unquestionable obedience to God. Verses 11 and 12, there's strength in faith. Verses 13 through 16, there's patience, there's hope. Verses 17 through 19, faith will enable you to let go and trust God. Well, I just can't let go. Well, you need faith. You need faith. Well, I'm trying. I just can't let go, but I'm trying. You don't need to try. You need faith. Faith, there's a revelation from God, verses 20 through 22. Causes one to use the example of the parents of Moses, causes one to put children in God's care. Verse 23. Leads to radical living. Verses 24 through 28. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. That's pretty radical. How was he able to do that? Well, it tells us, by faith. By faith. Faith leads to victory. Verses 29. Verse 30, by faith they passed through the Red Sea as on dry ground. Faith makes a difference. Notice verse 31, by faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not. She was different. What made her different? Faith. Faith gives courage. Faith gives perseverance. Faith gives victory. Notice verse 32 through 37. What shall I say more? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms. You can subdue a lot of things through faith. They wrought righteousness. They obtained promises. They stopped the mouths of lions. They did the extraordinary. How? Through faith. They quenched the violence of fire. You can't do that on your own ability. They escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness they were made strong. They waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the enemies of the aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance. That is, deny the Lord or you're going to die. They died. And they might obtain a better resurrection. And it goes on. But it tells us that through faith, there's courage. There's victory. There's perseverance. So these witnesses declare with their lives all of these things. And they serve as an encouragement to you and I. To do what? To run with patience the race that is set before us. So lastly, consider the fact that we are to be these witnesses. We are to become these witnesses. Again, in Hebrews 10:38, the just shall live by faith. And then that is illustrated in chapter 11. And these are the witnesses that we read of here in chapter 12, verse 1. And these witnesses of faith declare with their lives. Their lives serve as an encouragement to you and I today. These are people who lived thousands of years ago. And yet their lives still serve as an encouragement to you and I today. Our lives also are to declare and to be a testimonial. Our lives are to be testimonials. By the way that we live, we are to be declaring and to be a testimonial of a life lived in the awareness of God. That's what our life is to declare. It's to encourage others to live their life that way. Our lives are to declare that we are dedicated, committed, and surrendered to God. And even after we're gone, our lives can declare that to future generations. Our lives are to declare that we live in the pursuit of God. By the way that we live, we are to be declaring, our lives are to be a testimonial. That we don't have to be conformed to this world. But by faith, we can be transformed. By the way that we live, we are to be declaring and to be a testimonial that one can live life obeying God and following God and enjoying God. Our lives are to testify of that. By the way that we live our lives, we're to be declaring, we're to be a testimony that life can be filled with peace. That life can be filled with assurance. That we can live above. That life can be lived above this world. You don't have to live as a slave to the world. Our lives ought to declare that. Our lives ought to declare that the Christ life is a life above mere religion. Many times you read an obituary, and it's like the people are trying to convince themselves and others that whoever the deceased is, they were a religious person. They did this in the Catholic Church or Lutheran Church or Baptist Church, doesn't matter. They did this. In other words, they were religious. Oh, that our lives would testify more of just mere religion. By the way we live our lives, we're declaring, we ought to declare that our lives do not have to be mastered and controlled and governed by circumstances. As you read Hebrews chapter 11, you see these are testimonies that you don't have to be controlled. You don't have to be controlled by your past. You don't have to be controlled by circumstances or whatever. Faith lifts you above those things. Our lives are to be a testimony that we can live spiritually ascending lives. Lives connected to God. Oh, that our lives would bear witness. Would bear witness of a life lived for the Lord. And that our lives would serve as an encouragement for others to press on for God. Everybody can be used as an example. The problem is, you can be used as a bad example. Don't do it that way. That's what brother so-and-so did, and be a bad example. We don't want to be a bad example. You can learn from bad examples. Don't do that. Don't do that. We can be a good example. And those that are mentioned here in Hebrews 11 are good examples. This is how you live life. By faith. Did they always have it easy? Of course not. Nothing easy about Noah's life, or Abraham, or those mentioned. But they rose above. And they did so by faith. We need to become this great cloud of witnesses. Not viewing these witnesses from the standpoint of seeing, but from the standpoint of testifying. Our lives are to testify. And if you are going to testify with your mouth, and you ought to, make sure that your life is consistent with what you testify with your mouth. And if it isn't, keep your mouth shut. Because those who testify with their lips and their lives do not coincide, they do more damage than if they just keep their mouth shut. So yes, we're to do both. Our lives are to testify of the grace of God. Our lives are to testify for a life for God. And then we're to testify the same with our lips. And people can see both. So God help us to become a great cloud of witnesses. Brother Dave, if you'd come and lead us